Welcome everyone to the Transportation Commission meeting on December 8th. I'm calling this meeting to order at 6 o'clock p.m. Jennifer, if you could please do the roll call.
Yes. James.
Present.
Mark.
Here.
Brett.
Here.
Brooke.
Here.
Raymond.
Here.
Eric.
Here.
Henry.
Here.
Kelly. May. And Jeremy.
Here.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. At this time, I'm going to seek a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Is there a second?
I'll second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Great, so we've approved the agenda. This is now the time for brief announcements from city staff, commissioners, and we don't have a council member liaison tonight. So are there any communications from staff?
Yep, there are two things. The first thing is on your desk, you have our brand new active transportation map. Very exciting. We have a brand new bike map, and take a look at it, enjoy it, and we have some in the back for our guests as well. And then the second thing I wanted to share is that we did traffic counts at 6th Street and IJ&K in November to better understand the impacts of our restricted right turning movements. And then we also did some compliance assessment, and that data is going to be reviewed, and we will have an output or the results of that data coming to you next year. So those are my two updates, right?
I just wanted to highlight the EIR, the draft EIR for Willow Grove is available on the website and ready for public comment. And that this Wednesday, the Planning Commission will be doing a workshop where they will be reviewing it and providing their comments. So if you guys weren't aware, it is out and available for review.
Thank you, Ryan. Are there any announcements from commissioners?
Can I ask two quick questions
Sure.
about what they just said? First, where can people pick these up? Just at City Hall or?
They are available at the bike shops, the library, City Hall, Senior Center.
Awesome, great. And is the meeting on Wednesday going to be televised?
Yeah, I believe so. Typically, the Planning Commission meetings are available to view in real time on the city's website.
Thank you. Great. Any other announcements from commissioners? Okay. With that, we will move on to public comment. At this time, any member of the public may address the commission on matters which are not listed on the agenda or are listed on the consent calendar. Speakers will be limited to no more than 3 minutes. Speakers will also be asked to speak at the podium and to state their name for the record. Is there any public comment at this time? Okay, I will close public comment and we'll move on to the consent calendar. Items on the consent calendar are non-controversial and can be approved with one motion. The only item is our minutes from the last meeting. Would anyone like to make a motion to approve the consent calendar?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? The motion carries.
And then Brooke, we're gonna have you abstain because you were not at that meeting.
I did abstain.
Oh,
I
perfect.
did not move my lips on that one. Okay. All right, next are our regular agenda items, where tonight we just our regular agenda item. For this item, we'll receive a presentation. Well, actually, I don't believe we have a presentation tonight. We will have a discussion. We will open a discussion on the short-range transit plan existing conditions review, which we received 2 months ago. And then we'll open it up for public comment, and then after public comment, we can, okay, I'm a little at sea here. So
Yeah,
we just need, I guess we should take public comment and then discuss it? since
No,
there's
I think what would be really helpful is that if you guys have questions about the existing conditions report, that you tell us your questions now, and then we will close that, and then we can have public comment, and then if there's anything you want to discuss beyond that.
Okay, so at this point, then, we will open it up for questions from commissioners for staff. And after questions, then we'll take public comment on this item, and then following public comment, we will do a discussion. So are there questions for staff regarding the short-range transit plan? Yes, Raymond?
Just a couple, but, and apologies if this was already answered in October. For Davis Community Transit, in terms of post-pandemic ridership decline, were there any identified factors as to, I mean, other than, things like hybrid remote work and things like that were identified as
Challenges?
challenges?
Yeah, so we're doing a separate memo with the DCT project as a part of the short-range transit plan. And what was identified is challenges with staff and maintaining staff after COVID. And that was also an issue before COVID as well, so that issue has stayed the same.
As far as specific issues relating to what's caused it to rebound a little bit slower, when I look at the data, it's more in line with what we're seeing with transit rebounding throughout the United States and less with Unitrans, which is very unique and has recovered much quicker than most of the other services. And I think it really has less to do with anything DCT's doing or not doing, and more to do with just the unique model that Unitrans is and just the desire and the need for that service and how it really helps promote travel to and from the university and throughout town.
Have there been any other discussions with the Tremont Green group regarding extensions of that line?
We have a meeting with them on Friday to try to understand really what their needs are better and come in with a solution that'll work. There are a couple options that we are looking at. It might be like a rideshare voucher system. It might be an extension of an express service through DCT or something like that. Really, it's trying to find what's the most appropriate way to provide that service and what that service really needs to look like.
Great, thank you. Are there any other questions at this time for staff? Okay, if there's no more questions from commissioners, I'll open it up for public comment. Is there any public comment on this item? Okay, if we don't have any public comment, then I'll open it up for discussion.
Since I was one of the people who said it would be nice to spend a little more time on this item and not have it rushed because of the other two items on the agenda when we were discussing this. One of the things that I really appreciated was the origin-destination pairs. And one of the things that has been, at least on some people's wish list for many years, is kind of a comprehensive prioritization of certain routes. And the importance of routes, I think a large part would have to do with the number of people traveling those routes. So for instance, is it a key thing for people to be able to go from Southeast Davis over Mesa Boulevard to get to Target, right? Is this a high demand area? Is there a lot of people who are sort of going there, but they're going over the Pels Overcrossing and sort of doing this sort of sidestepping method to get to and from either, presumably let's use the bike kind of, people making use of bicycles at this point. Those types of things. One of the things, and I know that there are some concerns about sort of anonymity or confidentiality about the individual movements. So for instance, if you go too granular, you're going to notice like me leaving my house and then heading to, AM, PM to get a Slurpee or whatever variation that is, a Slurpee. Anyway, maybe we don't want that. However, I think it's important that there be some level of granularity about UC Davis, because right now UC Davis is sort of one dot where everything kind of, arrives at or leaves from. And, when we look at there's probably a good slide, this slide isn't so bad, but you can imagine there's a lot of apartment complexes on Covell. Are these folks trying to go somewhere near LaRue? Are they going to the ARC? Or are they headed more towards the MU? And so maybe we don't need the granular both origin and destination, but if we could have the destination on campus, or the flip side would be the origin from campus, because one of the ideas is we can't make every street wonderful due to budget constraints. I think the will and the want is there, but in terms of prioritization, as Ryan goes out to SACOG grants and grant funding agencies, do we do the heavy lift and try to fix Anderson, for instance, or do we do the lighter lift and less expense by making Oak a very easy, comfortable bicycling entry way to the campus? But part of that would be dictated based upon where on campus are people going. And so the big single dot on campus, while helpful, showing the general magnitude, the more detail where on campus they're going would be pretty helpful. That would be an ask. I feel like that level of data should be available in some manner to help us get there when we think, for instance, about cycling. Now, I know that Unitrans probably has some of that data in terms of how there's the movement within campus, but specifically for cycling routes, that would be of interest to me. And then at some level, that would also influence pedestrian safety as people are crossing to and from campus. We know that, for instance, Oak and Russell has kind of one of the bigger dots of collisions, and also the injury dots, both for cars, pedestrians, and cyclists. So anyway, roundabout way of kind of providing a little background, but that piece of information would be really, really helpful, because as we want to prioritize, safe movement to and from one of the main origin destinations, UC Davis, how do we go about doing that? In addition, I'll leave it for there in case my colleagues have things they want to add.
Kelly?
If I may add, I have a lot of experience. Biking I typically take, if I want to reach the ARC or the Student Medical Center, I live close to the Trader Joe's, so I'll take Anderson down. But that intersection with Anderson LaRue, there is a bike path going once you cross LaRue and you're continuing onto the ARC. There is no bike path, and so finding a way to merge with those cars there is definitely a greater safety issue. I do think it is a busier intersection, and I used it a lot in freshman year as well, as I lived in the secondary dormitory. So I think that is a highly used intersection where the bike path continuation could be useful in our budget.
Other discussion from commissioners? Eric?
I had a different topic, I didn't know if we were continuing on what Brett was talking about or
I think if you have another thing to contribute, that's fine.
Great. I had a question about, forgive me because I'm newer to how we're doing this here in Davis, but I think about Unitrans and the way that it is serving two populations, presumably both UC Davis students and Davis residents who aren't UC Davis students. And I wonder how do you, in general, when you have two masters or two separate goals how do you prioritize? Like, do you, is Unitrans's mission to make sure that we make it easiest for students and where they are to get to campus and back? Or is our mission to ensure that all residents of Davis have equal access to, public transportation mobility options? I don't know, I would like to hear a little more about how that is determined or how you guys think about it. That was, when I'd asked for this in October, I was like, I want to better understand how this stuff was figured out, but I didn't want to drag it out on that day. So that was my big question for them.
I mean, I don't think it's really an issue serving two masters. I think it's really trying to make sure we build a system that's working for as many people as possible, recognizing and realizing that we do have financial constraints, so we can't be running buses on 15-minute headways and have 50 or 60 routes. I think some of the lanes that we see, like the B&Q line, do better at kind of connecting the community as a whole. And we have a number of lines, some of them like the B line, actually, can you pull this up? That really serve the West Village and campus, and is really designed to really facilitate kind of on-campus circulation. Unitransit actually runs a couple of specific morning routes to help with the DJ USD students and make sure that we're connecting those students to their campuses so they can get to and from campus. So they run that in the morning and the afternoon. I think a lot of it is these routes are tailored really to help serve the populations and make sure that we are providing a service that touches as many people as we can.
I get that. I mean, the thing that specifically makes me wonder about that is changing the route around Mace, crossing over Mace to Target, like for the people on south of 80. I think I could see people who aren't trying to get to UC Davis liking to be able to not have to walk across there and had a bus that got them to Target. And now they really don't. I mean, they'll have to walk across, or they have to take the bus, all the way down to UC Davis and then all the way back up to Target. And so that, in my mind, makes me feel like, okay, we're changing this because and I remember the presentation was because, I totally get this, it's really hard to keep the buses on time because that Mace overpass gets backed up, and there's, very legitimate, reasonable reasons to change the routes, and I'm not opposed to changing the routes, but to me, if we're trying to get people to where people are going, which I think Target is a pretty popular place for people to try to get to in that shopping area, we just cut a bunch of people off from that. Like, they're going to have to get there a different way, or take a longer bus route. I mean, there's always a way, but it becomes more difficult. And so when I saw that change, that's what I was thinking was, oh, are we? And it isn't the wrong answer. If the answer is that we're running a service to get students to and from school from wherever they are in the city, and it's nice that people in the city can also use the service. That I'm not saying that's wrong or right. I'm just trying to understand if that is what we're trying to do, or not. Because again, there's just so many. There's priorities, right? There's multiple priorities that we can make number one. I don't know what is number one, and that's what I thought.
And specific to the PQ proposed changes, I think the first thing is we've just closed the public outreach and comment period. We received over 2,000 responses on all of our changes, and that is a very good return rate on something like this, and we're still processing what the data says and what the feelings of the community are. The PQ line, the way it is right now, the closest bus stop to the Target is still half a mile away. It's not providing direct service.
Mm-hmm.
And that's one of the things we're looking at as we discuss this. I think the proposal, the way it was, really does have some benefits, and it's the reason that we advanced it. It was the best proposal that we were able to come up with. One of those benefits is it provided bus access to all the current stops. Everything else we were looking at would mean taking stops out of service and changing the way, or changing where people would have to pick up the bus. And this did not do this. It still gave us buses that were still working on the same kind of circuits and routes. They just weren't crossing Mace. like I said, we're looking at this, we're gonna be looking at more alternatives. This is coming back to you specifically to talk about those service changes and what our options are, but we need time to process that information. But as far as just kind of our thinking for why we came up with that, it was really, we wanted PQ to have, I mean, if the bus is on time, people will use it. If the bus is consistently late, they won't. And it was something that we could do without really disrupting access to buses and making sure we still provided service to all the bus stops that exist in town.
Another piece to this is Unitrans did do an evaluation of the amount of people that would be displaced if the PQ does not go over I-80, and that's 5 to 7% of the riders on the PQ. So if you think about that, the significance of the 5 to 7% versus the on time and making a trade-off.
Sure, there's always, I get that there's always trade-offs, and I'm not saying one is better than the other. I drive across Mace all the time, that overpass, and there's always people waiting at that bus stop. And either they're all going to Aikida's or they're going to Target. And I think just because it's a half-mile walk or whatever, that's not stopping people from using that service. And they may, I'm not saying they're coming from South Davis, they might be coming from anywhere else. But I do know that the fact that it's not right in front of Target isn't keeping people from riding the bus to get there. But yeah, I'm not opposed, and I'm glad we're gonna continue to talk about these service changes. Like I said, I prefaced from the beginning, I'm not saying this is the wrong thing to do. It may be the right thing to do. I'm just, as we're gonna be thinking more about this, want to understand what we are prioritizing. And so that's, I get it. Thank you very much for the answers.
And I agree, it's a hard choice, and we need to consider it and take care when making these types of decisions. So I really do appreciate the response and the questions.
Just a quick comment. I do, as a semi-frequent user of the PQ, I appreciate that that split with the PQ and as well as the S and the weekend O. It's a common tactic for long-winded, urban bus routes to be split in order to improve on-time performance. I did notice, though, along the lines of that bus stop between at the intersection of Second and Mays, you kind of sever that yellow bus 42B regional connection, and you're requiring South Davis riders to double back to catch that connection if indeed they're looking to do that. So that's an issue to look out for.
So a couple of follow-up comments on things that have already been discussed, and I really appreciate the opportunity to go through this again because there's a lot of data in here that, there is a lot of data in here that is worth exploring and trying to understand what it means. First, I think it was Amy's comment on Russell and LaRue. I bike that regularly. I fully agree with that comment. It's just a problematic intersection. Some physical protections to cyclists when they stage would really help go a long way. It's not a transit question, but it came up in the context. On the Target route change that makes Target less accessible, is it feasible to consider maybe a temp stop that is closer to Fernie Place, that is on the current route, to see, because sure, people might still be taking the bus, the PQ line to Target, despite the fact that they have to walk a reasonable amount of distance with some shopping in hand, but you might get more ridership, displace fewer people if you would experiment with a temporary stop to see if the demand is there or is growing compared to what it is now. And I just note that there isn't a route change here. It's on the current draft route, but I also can't speak to what the impact here would be of adding an extra stop in terms of how long it takes and if that would disrupt the service. So maybe something to consider. The other question that was asked on us now before, where now having been able to study this in somewhat more detail, I think there was a question on whether the G line would run, or some bus lines would run Anderson versus Sycamore. Having now seen on a variety of maps the density of ridership and the density of car-free or low-car households being more concentrated around the Sycamore corridor, I think the draft proposal as it was proposed, I think makes like, it wasn't clear to me why that was chosen. It makes more sense having now been able to take in the different maps that provide the different data. So I know that we're not here again to provide approval, but I think it makes sense that that was the draft that was advanced. So thanks for that. And then I have maybe a question that I'm only looking for a big picture answer here. I think we are funding a lot of Unitrans by mandating all our undergraduates to pay $146 a year or a quarter.
There's a quarterly.
It's a quarterly fee, right? So what if we ask Davis residents to fund the same dollar amount, or even maybe the same percentage income amount? And I know we're not going to do that. That would, back of the envelope, add $10 million to the operating budget of Unitrans. Like, what could we do service-wise if we, asked everybody to contribute? And the reason for that ask, which we would have to articulate, and it would just be a thought exercise for now, is everybody benefits. I've made the example before, a bus full of people getting out of the bus and getting into a single occupancy vehicle with a 10-car length recommended distance between cars would be a line of cars a mile long. You don't want to be in the back of that. I know many people in Davis consider bus for students, and therefore they think they don't derive any benefit of that. And the argument here is you definitely gain benefit from us having this really phenomenal Unitrans service, even if you never use it, because the alternative is everybody mostly would get into a car. And that has all kinds of detrimental effects that everybody in Davis is worse off for. Now, again, I'm not proposing put on the ballot or pass this, but we should maybe educate everybody that, we are much better off for having the tool in our toolbox that Unitrans is. And, let's engage in this exercise of what would it mean if we imagined every Davis resident. We can talk about income restrictions, but how much more money, $10 million more money in the operating budget, how much more could we do with that? And I don't know the answer to that question because I don't know what proportion of the service is funded directly from student fees and how much additional funds get in. But I think it's worth the exercise. Maybe to educate, bring people along that, we all benefit from this, even if we don't ever use it or rarely use it. Maybe there's a chance to just big picture question whether this would be helpful to, generate acceptance and buy-in that we all benefit, even if we all don't always use it.
Can I just,
Oh,
sorry.
yeah, go ahead.
You can go ahead, I'll go later, it's fine.
It was just going to be a quick follow-up. I personally wanted to know exactly, a bit about Delta as to, for example, for rush hour service, how many additional headways would something like a fee increase or a property tax parcel increase get you, especially on the trunk lines?
Good evening. So my name is Jeff Flynn. I'm the general manager at Unitrans. So our operating budget is $10 million a year, and 2/3 of that's funded by student fees, and 1/3 is funded by the city. So a $10 million budget, operating budget, if you double that, it's double, right? So I think you could do the math on that. So that's just quick numbers.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
Just two comments. Just echoing, I know we're not here for approval, but I've also, from student feedback, I've heard positive feedback from the ending of the B line for the G1, so also reiterating that. Something else I wanted to ask, maybe for the graduate students we have at the table, I know the Graduate Student Association had talks of maybe trying to join a fee referendum to support Unitrans. I don't know if you have any updates on that. I know it failed a couple years back. I heard some people are trying to bring it back. I don't know if we have updates on it.
I'm not sure that it's appropriate for this venue. It doesn't seem to be related to the current discussion.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, a couple of things. I think it's important that as a commission we have a discussion amongst ourselves. It's not just talking at staff. Couple of things. So the reason I'm interested in the data of where people are going on campus is because I like to get away from the anecdotal. So you and I live in very similar neighborhoods, so the challenge location is one near us. And so I imagine if we had people on the southeastern portion of Davis, they would bring up their intersection. And so the idea, if only 5% of the trips are from that section where we live, I live by Rite Aid, are going to the ARC, but the rest are going to more of the heart of campus. That's interesting to know, right? And so we have Sycamore, which is kind of okay. It's probably a more modest lift to get that to, call it a B+, A- intersection. Anderson is a very heavy lift to get it to even just a B- intersection. It's just, it's not great. I would never let, a 7-year-old bike there on their own, especially turning left, total unprotected sort of left turn kind of thing. It's just not great. And then there's Oak, which again, I think would be a lighter lift in terms of design and cost. And so having that specific data would help us, and maybe the big challenge is somewhere that Kelly May and myself haven't thought about it, just a different neighborhood, but getting away from the anecdotal because we tend to operate. And so for instance, we heard somebody from one of the affordable housing complexes who've come forward and talked about this gap in service. And I think we need to figure out a way to address that in an efficient manner that meets their needs. So I really appreciate staff meeting with them to better understand kind of the nature and magnitude of their kind of that gap. But there are probably other areas as well. And so, here's an opportunity where there just seems to be a lot of good quantitative data. And if we could get in a format that would help us with prioritization, I think that could be very valuable. The other thing is a couple of things. I can't help myself. People know me, and I can't, help but take the bait. The students voted to have their fees cover Unitrans. It wasn't the city imposing that. So, yes, the city could do a tax measure. It would require a 2/3 vote. I think just looking at the information that was provided, maybe 5% of the ridership is sort of paying at some level, like kind of not as part of their student fees. So either with, let's call it more like 8%. My computer went blank here. I have it here. Okay, so 87.6% are UCD undergraduates with the ID card or ID. So let's call it 10% are doing something else. Unitrans is awesome in terms of the network, in terms of the frequency. This is as good as a bus system gets. And so this idea that we need to plop 10 million more dollars to somehow address the issues, I think, Mark, we would probably both agree that the easiest first step, and which would Unitrans really love, is if we could double the number of individual fare paying riders. So just incremental income because we get more people to ride. And as a longtime resident in Davis, I didn't know that I could ride Unitrans. And, I tend to pay half attention. And so maybe one of the things that we in the city can do is prioritize more funds about outreach. And maybe there's a way, there's sort of the 10 ride ticket sounds kind of interesting, but maybe, we could do some analysis and maybe do a pilot program where maybe instead of it $1.50, it's $1 for just single ride. But the idea is incorporated with that would be positive public outreach. So people know, like, hey, this is for everybody, give it a shot. You don't have to commit to a pass. And maybe $1 is just more of a, easy way to do it. Maybe there's, I don't know whether Unitrans is moving towards a tap-to-pay system with credit cards or apps, or they already have that. It's been a while since I've been on a Unitrans bus. But the point being is I think that would be a win-win. That would address what you've talked about, Mark, is increasing ridership and showing the community its benefit to everyone. But I think also that additional revenue could be perhaps meaningful for the Unitrans operating budget. But I think just out of the gate, the Unitrans network and frequency is super. I think we're very, very fortunate, and I think it's more of an information vacuum for longtime residents not knowing what's available to them. I do have something new to bring up, and I think it does fit within this agendized item in terms of kind of looking at the network specifically around Unitrans. And the university, kind of based upon previous pledges they've made, they will not initiate this ask, but the city could initiate this ask. And the ask that I have is a question. If the West Village connection at Arthur were open to transit, and so before I get misquoted, transit only, we're talking at maximum 5 to 10 frequencies per hour, more like probably less than 5 per hour on a corridor that has, call it, 800 vehicles plus per hour at that section of Russell. What would that do with assisting the operation of the existing network, and could there be greater connectivity along Lake Boulevard, right? So this is not a question to necessarily be answered today, but I would, the background to this is when West Village was proposed, the near neighbors got very concerned that this would add traffic to their neighborhoods in West Davis. And so the university agreed that there would not be connectivity from West Village to Russell. And we have this very interesting situation where often people in West Village will go to Dixon to buy their groceries at Walmart because of the connectivity issues. And I'm not suggesting that single occupancy vehicles be allowed to access Russell from West Village directly. I'm just curious about the idea, like right now emergency vehicles can access at Arthur. If we were to very, very slightly change that scope to allow for transit, and the idea would be perhaps there would be a Unitrans bus that would swing through West Village and then cut up through Lake, perhaps not. But if so, that would be very supportive of the supermarket in that area. That's had a lot of financial, they've had some challenges in keeping afloat, but also would add convenience for students who are living in West Village to go to Super Owl Brewing or these various other eateries that are there. And it seems from a planning perspective that this would not be an unreasonable thing. From an operational efficiency thing, there might be some additional efficiencies from changing what now is essentially a giant cul-de-sac in terms of the operation of some of the routes. So I'm just throwing that out there for my colleagues and perhaps staff to kind of, just open it up for discussion if there's sort of interest in discussing this further. But I think at this stage with West Village having grown substantially over the past 10 years, having that connection would seem like it would be a benefit for all concerned. And again, this would be for transit only, and we're talking like 5 additional vehicles per hour. So not what sometimes appears on Nextdoor, which would be the leaving out important details, such as the fact that it would be transit only. Jeff Lynn was not anticipating, and so I appreciate that he probably would want to reflect on this a little bit and see whether it has any momentum before, making any comments. But I'd be curious about staff and my colleagues whether this is something that we might want to dig into a little further, and also some of the student members. Maybe at this point, anecdotal thoughts would be helpful as well.
I could jump in and say that I know that I believe it's the U line, which is a weekend-only line that serves the MU to West Village, is a very popular option for students living in that area to access grocery stores like Trader Joe's. So I think that your idea might have merit in that there is significant usage of that line. I want to say that I've heard at some point, please correct me if I'm wrong, that it's at up to a 90% load factor depending on which specific weekend, which I've seen ASUCD quote before. So with that being said, I do think that a connection to a West Davis, like the Westgate Plaza shopping facility, could be useful based on the use of that line that goes to like a grocery store type thing. However, outside of that use case, I don't think that there's necessarily strong ridership there from a student perspective. I know that the lion's share of students, regardless that are at least documented by the system, are going to campus. And outside of specific data collection times, trips that happen from origins and destinations that aren't to and from a terminal, aren't counted. So that could be an area maybe for further study to see if that, outside of the grocery store factor, of interest is there. But I think it certainly could be.
I can chime in a suggestion by my colleague on potentially opening that. Provided that there is ridership that is there or will be there once you make changes like this, and provided that you keep that closed off in a way, like with a bus lane and a bollard that effectively blocks the access. Because I've seen Uber drivers cross that bike bridge and find access to that. So as long as you effectively manage that, I think it could be, could be a way to unlock access. Can oversee the ramifications of that, but a priori not opposed to that at all. I think it's worth exploring. I want to go back to the other issue that we were discussing now. This is the whole point of this. Like, I wasn't suggesting to levy a tax and raise $10 million. I was suggesting to just engage as a part of an educational exercise in imagining what this would be. And again, educating people, our community, that everybody benefits from the bus. Right? And I think, as a first step, and it may not go beyond that, but I think it's worth, I think it's an exercise worth having and a conversation worth having. And in that context, I'm looking at page 44, where we talk about fare box recovery, but also then subsidy per passenger. And it perpetuates this idea that public transit is something to subsidize, and we explicitly say that. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. But we also subsidize the pervasive mode of transportation, which is car transportation, but we don't call it that. And the question maybe is, for a future iteration of this, maybe to Jeff, can we imagine, can we start to price up the cost of not having a bus system? Like, there is a cost of not having something like this. In more congestion, more pollution, more maintenance to roads. And it's not entirely trivial to put those costs on a piece of paper, but there is a cost to that, and it's substantial. And every time we talk about, in the context, particularly in the US and in California, where we expect public transit to be for people who can't afford to have a car, and it's a certain demographic who we associate with that. And it's something that we always want to have fully self-sufficient, which is the bane of public transit in the US. Can we add a paragraph here that says, there is an alternative with no transit, and it would also have a cost. It would be different people bear the cost, and it would not always be an easy, like a directly measurable cost. You have to make some estimation as to, the effect of economic losses, of getting stuck in even more traffic. But there is a cost, and we know that. And we can make some assumptions to kind of at least make that cost part of the conversation. In which case, it doesn't become do we or don't we subsidize, but it is which cost do we want to bear? Is it what we call, what we explicitly list here as a subsidy versus nothing, because that's not a fair comparison. Is it what we call it a subsidy versus the cost of not having Unitrans and what it offers to our community? And I think that would be, I think it would help. I think it would help normalize and gain acceptance. And so my comments on, consider people who are not students in Davis also contributing was intended as an exercise in engaging the conversation, much as my colleague Brad was suggesting, more than, let's just propose a tax measure next month and get this ball rolling. No, I mean, clearly not. But I think it's a conversation worth having, because too many of us think this bus thing is something other people do, and it's just not something that we benefit from. And I think this is objectively not true, and we can do a better job trying to educate that. So that was how those comments were framed. I have more things, but if there are additional contributions to both this item as well as the suggestion of opening up the West Village, I can hold off on those.
I'd love to add one more thing about your comment regarding this exercise of, I guess, effectively doubling the Unitrans budget. I think that when you consider the entire community population that comes to UC Davis every day, the undergraduate students are just one key part of that. There's something like 24,000 staff members that come at different points in time to the day. And there's graduate students, of which there's several thousand. So I think that there's a strong argument. I know that formerly known as TAF, the Department of Transportation Services on campus, their Memorial Union and Hutchinson Drive garages are at capacity almost every day from their own published data. So I think there's a strong argument that while Unitrans is capturing probably a much higher percentage of commuters than any other bus system in California for sure, for such a central location, that there's still a lot of room to grow, especially in the non-undergraduate student population. So I definitely think that's something to consider for the future, and any increase that could help cut into staff and faculty, community campus, or graduate students who are in that 10% of non-undergraduate riders that we see from on the short-range transit plan, I think is really worth considering, because like you said, that's more cars off the road, and that's less congestion of cars on campus, which is a serious concern for student cyclists and pedestrians and everybody else who's on campus, of which there's tens of thousands every day. So yeah.
I'll add to that real quick. I love that comment. The campus is faced, like everybody, with the question of how do we deal with Scope 3 emissions, of which transit emissions is one of them. And I mean, this is coming down from UCOP. The campus is starting to grapple with that. For our campus, I work on campus. I say our campus. For UC Davis campus, we actually have a surprising number of people who commute into by car. So the campus's Scope 3 emissions are significant, and it's a harder nut to crack than replacing a single on-campus energy plant, which is a single source of emission, and you just do away with it, which is not trivial in itself. But this is this diffuse thing where you're not a single agent as a campus. On the one hand, they want to hope that somebody else, the state, will kind of solve this for us. But here's a scenario where the campus has a tool in the toolbox to, rather than accepting and at some point maybe even have to monetize their Scope 3 emissions, they can invest some of their money to avoid those emissions by buying in and shoring up the already well-working Unitrans system and expanding it to additional non-undergraduate student campus populations. I love that comment, and I think this context is a context in which that discussion might move forward, at least in the exploratory phase.
Any other commissioners?
Since we're having conversations amongst ourselves, I wholeheartedly agree and think that it is lovely to think about the other folks who use UC or go to UC Davis every day that aren't undergraduate students. I just gently push back on the idea that the 24,000 people who work there are as flexible or as easygoing with their time as undergraduate students are. I know it seems like it probably was a long time ago, but I once was an undergraduate student at a university, and you can show up a little early. You can plan to show up early and do some studying and things. And when you're a 45-year-old parent of 2 or 3 or 6 or 1, and you have to get your kid to school, and you have to be sure and pick up the bread for the pasta feed that night, and all the things that you have to do, it becomes a lot more difficult for a lot of those people who work at campus to be as flexible and just ride the bus when when the bus happens to come by and when you can get home. So I mean, it's a laudable and wonderful thing to think about everybody who goes to UC, everybody who travels to UC Davis to be able to just ride the bus. There are, of course, other factors in adult lives that not always undergraduates have to deal with. And so I agree that all to the good. I also think that the Unitrans system is really probably as good as it needs to be to attract those people who are going to ride the bus. But there are these extraneous factors that make it harder for them to do so. That, I mean, it very well could be education. I mean, I like Brett, I don't know enough about the Unitrans system to feel comfortable as an adult who lives in Davis. And I think, maybe we could do a better job of educating our neighbors as to, the option that Unitrans provides. And I would like to be able to do that. I think, I think that's one of the things that the Transportation Commission is supposed to do is help educate our communities and our neighbors about transportation challenges and opportunities in our community. And I think Unitrans, frankly, is one of those amazing opportunities that a lot of people don't think about or know enough about to be able to take advantage of. So that would be my perspective on that.
To divert from the conversation, I did have a question that kind of went back to some earlier discussion on Target. What is and I know we discussed this earlier, but I've forgotten. What is the goal for basically the distance between where the stops are and where the onboarding and destination points are? I know it was discussed that there was sort of a goal for what that distance was.
I mean, short answer is 1/4 mile. We try to have bus stops within 1/4 mile, and we meet that for the majority of the city. There's a few areas that we don't.
Thank you. Brett?
So on slide 25, is it possible to pull that out?
What, are you on?
Oh, I'm on the attachment that was
So-
page 46 of 106. There we go.
Oh.
It's labeled 25 because I guess.
Okay. Oh, I'm on.
So that's the one,
Okay.
the map part. So it's a little hard to read. Maybe you can zoom in a smidge. It's a salmon-colored little leg. It's the Davis to Dixon route. And, one of the things we're very fortunate about is our transportation question is somewhat easy because UC Davis is sort of the origin or destination of everyone's trip in general, in terms of just vast magnitude. 2,000 to 5,000 trips. There's not great connectivity to Dixon. This isn't necessarily a Unitrans thing, but this is perhaps the Transportation Commission's, one of the things to keep in mind. I don't know if people have ridden their bikes down through the South Campus and kind of Old Davis Road and kind of worked their way to Dixon. But I used to do that here and there. It's not a great connection. That might be something, for us to keep in mind. There's the challenge in that we're in Yolo County and Dixon's in Solano County, and we don't always, pair up perhaps as often as we should. But that seems like a segment which, just for a modest amount of effort, could be improved for a pretty sizable number of people. And maybe I'm misreading the color scheme. I guess that's 5,000 to 10,000. Yep. So that's a good number of people. Whereas everything else, Woodland to Davis has pretty good connectivity. Davis to West Sac and Sacramento, some level of good connectivity. But Davis to Dixon, not so much. So that might just be something for us to put on our radars. And that could be, improving the cycling infrastructure, that could be improving transit, a variety of things. Dixon is definitely a satellite, residential area for staff and students coming to UC Davis.
Just another thought that came to mind on the discussion that we were having about Russell and then Anderson and Sycamore. I was just looking back at some data. Right now, campus has about 15,000 students on campus, and in the next 5-ish years, you want to increase that by another 2,500, so about 17,500 kids on campus. And that's going to be spread between West Village and the Segundo addition they're making, like where the parking lot is right now. So going back to the anecdotal questions, those are going to be people who are going to be on those intersections, and we are going to be in that area. So I think it's just interesting to keep that in mind as well. About 2,000 people are probably going to be around that area, and then what was mentioned about West Village as well could be.
Thank you.
Mark?
I think one more set of questions, friendly suggestions, and bear with me when I scroll down to the pages where I wrote them down. Here we go. Yeah, so page 44, no, a little further, 46, 45. 5.
Page 45 of
I'm sorry, my PDF is jumping all over the place.
This one?
No, I'm sorry. I scrolled past it. I have a couple of comments and they're escaping me.
Describe the page to us.
No, it's just the wording I was going to talk about, not even the figure. I think that was too far. Here we go. I'm so sorry. That was too far. Page 15.
15 of the...
15 of the PDF document, 36 of the document, sorry. It is confusing that there are two different.
Yes, there it is.
I'm sorry. Page 36, thanks for bearing with me. Yes, and it's just the text here. There's a couple of these, and they're all the same vein. And the vein here is that for every one of these categories of people, we talk about how it does or compares to cars, but we don't offer the alternative mode. And I think the pieces of the puzzle that we have, particularly as we're planning for people to move away from car only, I think it would behoove us to, while this is a transit document, to explicitly and purposefully call out the cycling, pedestrian, active mobility infrastructure as another piece of the puzzle, particularly in those areas and for those transit corridors where the density doesn't exist. Like, they're complementary pieces. They are not at all like anybody who doesn't take a car but is able to take either transit or a bike, that's a win. I think that's the big picture here. And I was reading these and I couldn't help but notice that what we do here in several of these paragraphs is we compare it to whether or not we have access to a car or can drive one, and that's it. So for the youth one, we talk about the under 18 population can also be more transit reliant, as they may not have access to a car or are too young to drive, but still want to travel independently. And I'm speaking as somebody who grew up on streets where I was biking and was able to navigate independently, and have always thought that was normal, and it's not here. The other day I was biking after dark, so I had my 10-year-old in my cargo compartment, and we're biking around on Sycamore, and he's like, hey, I know where we are. Because, he has enough situational awareness, he bikes it all the time. And that independence is tremendously valuable, and not in the least part because it means I'm not playing chauffeur for my kid, right? And I know this is not intended to be exclusionary, but I think here's an example where we explicitly, we don't need a car or a bus. We don't need a bus to travel. Like we can actually, particularly in this town, can do so by bike. So maybe Jeff, if you can, I don't know who wrote this, if it's you, Jeff, or Ryan. I think I would really, for a next iteration of this, make for every one of these paragraphs, call out the third wheel, the third tool, and it's active transportation, which is one that is arguably objectively better when it works for that solution. It doesn't always work. And there's a couple of these. I'll point them out because there's a pattern here. Then for college-age residents, we have 3 college-age residents who are joining us today. Many college-age students, this is the next page, page 37, may have driver's licenses, but don't have full-time access in an automobile. And by the way, we just advocated for people taking transit to a brewery, which I think is always superior than taking the car to a brewery. Especially if they live on campus and or are not allowed to park by the university. Actually, the most recent 2023-2024 travel survey from campus indicates that particularly freshman students, upwards of 40% or more of the students have a bike mode share. 40% or more of the freshman students travel to and from campus by bike. And for the older student years, it is still well upwards of 30%. I mean, my God, if you could achieve that, Davis, why? Imagine the difference. And yet, this short paragraph, and I know it's short, and it wasn't by design, but omits that. Like, we should hold this up as, there are actually more students in our town bike to campus than take the bus to campus. And fortunately, both of them are still more than drive. But here's another opportunity to really just kudos to our students. I mean, right? Another example. Again, as friendly as I can deliver it, but I think it's a pattern here. Persons with disabilities. I think this is the next page over, page 38. I think a large number of people with disabilities actually have no access to a car, and I think that's more so than people who do have access to a car. And then we say they may or may not be able to choose not to drive, but again, we don't even bother to talk about active mobility. And I'm going to share an example here where a close family member of me in the Netherlands this summer had a major health scare and had to relearn how to walk. And she was able to gain independence with an electric, like a hand pedal bike, because there was an active transportation network that was accessible for people of all kinds of abilities. Right? So there is an example where, sure, there is also a need to make sure that we don't have the occasional stretch of bike and ped infrastructure, but that it's a connected network that allows people to also get around even if they don't want or can use a car. And I think the last one, it's a double one, it's zero vehicle households. And the first paragraph, this is page 39. It's framed as the lack of access to a private vehicle, as if the access to a private vehicle is something we should aspire to. And with cost of new vehicle topping $50,000, we now need 7-year car loans to pay for this. We talk a bunch about affordability in general, and we should be very concerned about affordability concerns. Can we stop holding up access or ownership of private vehicles as the thing that we all should aspire for? Because implicitly, that's what we're doing here. And I think most people still agree with that statement if you were to tell them that, but I think we are not here to kind of follow where the community is. I think we want to try and at least educate people that, there are many students who fortunately choose to not have a private vehicle because, it's a financially smart thing to do. Like $10,000 to $15,000 of cost per year is the average cost of car ownership. If you do the maintenance, the purchase, the depreciation, the taxes, it is a large cost second only to, right? So let's not normalize that. And along the same vein, the last one, on the low-income individuals, because car ownership, next page, is expensive. Yes, it is. Thank you for calling it out. Low-income households generally have fewer cars and therefore may rely on modes to meet their mobility needs. Again, no mention of the tremendous cost savings of maybe avoiding, if you're a low-income household, of second car ownership. But also, the sentence is framed as if car ownership is something that we should aspire to. And we've all been raised that way, and I completely understand where we're coming from. But once you see how inadvertently even we fall into the trap of framing this as if we all should aspire to the norm is to have a car to go places. This autonormativity, this motor normativity, I think I see this shine through in this document. I am confident it's not by design, it was not deliberate, but I see it, and I'm going to offer a friendly suggestion to try and avoid this for the next iteration, and also to deliberately, for every one of these paragraphs, touch on both the transit, which is what this document is about, but also the active mobility as the alternative, explicitly and deliberately. And that's it. Thank you. I'm happy to discuss this, but I thought it was important to share this.
Thank you, Mark. Is there any more discussion from commissioners? I think it's been a really good discussion. I think it's been good input. Yes, James.
Yeah, I thought it's interesting to consider what the difference would be between the student population and general population of Davis, whereas, as Mark said, the student population has such a high percentage of bike ridership. Seeing as we all share the same infrastructure, what could be the differences that end up with this high ridership among students and lower among general population? Could it be the kind of trips that they're making, where students often have schedules going onto campus, or going between student housing and commercial centers in Davis, whereas the general community might be living in more suburban areas, farther away from the center of the city, and they might be commuting to work in other locations or going to different kinds of stores. And also in terms of the greater use of, the potential for greater use of Unitrans among the population of Davis. I saw that we received an email from a community member about removing the fees for parking over the winter holiday period in the city center, that this community member seemed to think was advertised to attract people to shop more locally in Davis, because people could then feel like, oh, I can drive downtown, not have to pay to park, and then I'm more likely to go shopping there. It's if, and I do think that Unitrans provides a really good service, but, why does it seem that some people think it takes removing the parking prices, people to shop in the city center, whereas they could always have the option, and have always had the option, to, for example, take the bus? I thought that's an interesting question, and I also don't know the answer, but if anybody wants to discuss that.
I think a lot of it goes back to some of the things that Eric said earlier about, there are differences in the population that have to do with time, flexibility. Some of it is habit, obviously. I think if the student population, for the most part, I think they have a little bit more flexibility in their time. Their schedule is a little bit more consistent in terms of going to class and that type of thing. I think that most students are still interested in spending less money than owning a car, and owning a car has a lot more costs and things than it would at that stage. I think there's a lot of issues there. There's a lot of issues of why people don't take an alternative mode of transportation. I know personally, there's sometimes I'll ride my bike and go downtown. There's sometimes I'll take the car, depending on, what's the weather, how much time do I have, do I have to pick up something big? It's just all those kind of things. So I think there's a whole host of variables there in terms of what drives people to use a certain mode of transportation. And I think the bus is a good alternative in some cases, but I think, that it's not gonna be the alternative of choice all the time for everybody. So, yeah, there's a lot of variables there, I think.
Kind of seconding on what you were saying, I think one of the things that Davis does a really good job on is not only taking into account the extra costs, that's exactly why I own the car, insurance, parking permits, etc., maintenance, but also what I've found to be very successful in cities that are not as car-centric is the ability to make other modes of transportation more efficient, time-wise. Because a lot of times I've had people offer me rides to lecture, but I'm like, I might just go later and bike instead because I can bike there, I can park directly in front of my lecture hall, whereas if you take the car, you have to find some kind of parking lot that's the closest to campus. You have to go around. It's very difficult to find parking. Most of the lots are pretty full. And then you have to go walk from the parking lot to campus if your lecture is kind of wedged in the middle of the campus, and it takes more time. So I think Davis does a really good job at just biking, or just even finding parking downtown. I'd much rather bike. Just making biking a more efficient and time efficient alternative, as well as buses, in comparison to individual cars in such a densely packed small city of college students. I think Davis does a really good job with that.
Anyone?
On an unrelated notice that I was thinking about now as well, on connecting the city, I think one of the reasons, at least particularly for me in the beginning, was so hard to get into riding Unitrans was I didn't know where the buses went to. And I think a lot of people have them memorized, and students learn to memorize them, which bus do I have to take. I think maybe just getting the map out there could help residents of Davis understand that, hey, if I want to go downtown, I can take a bus because I can see on the little map there's a colorful line that takes me there. So I think maybe that could also be a good idea. Get the map out there. People like maps. People like looking at colorful lines. So maybe that could be a fun thing we could do.
Every time you take transit in the city, it's always a new adventure, and it takes some kind of like getting out there to try and engage with that. So there's definitely that. To James's point, it's normalizing the status quo of like driving a car that I just try to friendly call out a little bit, because I think if we all find that the default mode of transportation, we're going to stick with that. It is the quality of the network, particularly if you talk about both bus as well as active transit. And with that, I go back to the place where I was a kid once, and when I go back now, the network is so much better than it was. And it's all about safe, physically separated, uninterrupted connection. And Davis has a lot going for it compared to most other California cities. But it's often said, this network, as long as you have, if there's a weak link in there, like we just talked about, somebody told me there was a connection where there, for a couple of blocks wasn't a bike path, well, then nobody's going to take that route. And there is the networks that exist in cities that we strive to be, and I just shared this, it's very common for European cities to reach 50-60% road share, and they all do it the same way. It's basically physically protected, direct connections that are accessible for many, and not everybody will take their bike or take the bus for every trip, but many people will take that mode of transportation for some of their trips, which makes it better for people who drive for that trip as well. And it's not just students in all these towns and cities, it's people of increasingly all ages and abilities. And the message needs to be, not everyone has to take the bike all the time, but if many of us did that more, and it's part of what is happening on campus. Clearly it is a hassle to have to take your car around and store it somewhere at no cost to you, even though it is still a cost of parking, but that's costing much more money than the individual person pays to park there. And downtown Davis, I don't go there. I just don't. Because to me, the fact that I have to navigate around both parked cars and driving cars, it's just unappealing to me. I go there when I need to, but I do not go there. It is not a destination that I enjoy. I love going to my neighborhood like a place where I can just grab some food or a drink. It is an unappealing place to me. Many or any of the city that you go to, and like all across Europe and many other places, people drive to those downtowns too, but I believe they leave the cars at the back of it, and you have a core that is truly pedestrianized, and then there is so much space that people can also still bike their bikes there. I mean, that's the difference. You go from, you know, a place where people go if they have a need to a place where people go because it's fun to hang out there. And, you know, there is still some level of business in downtown. Maybe that's enough, but I venture a guess that I'm not alone in really finding downtown Davis not an appealing destination to go to and spend my time and my business. Although I would welcome the opportunity to have a place that, you know, is centered around people, but that would be much more appealing. So I think it's the network. It is the stuff that we are here to plan for, and we're not going to get there overnight, but we should.
So we're kind of veering off into bicycle infrastructure here. And so if there's any more comments related to the transit plan, it'd be nice to wrap that up. So if there's no more comments related to this, as I said earlier, I think it's been a great discussion, and I really appreciate everybody's input and viewpoints on this. I think hopefully this has been helpful for staff, also to hear some of the feedback on this. So if there's no more discussion on this, there's no need for us to make a motion or anything. You've received the discussion points. So we'll close out that item and we will move on to the task calendar. So Jennifer, or Ryan, do you want to go over the task calendar?
Yeah, I'm going to go over subcommittees. I reached out to all of you to set up your subcommittee meetings. I'm still waiting to hear back from some of you, I believe.
I filled mine out.
Okay, he filled his out. All right, then that means that on Wednesday, I will put together the Safe Routes to School subcommittee, and then speed humps, I will put together soon too. So those are the two that are outstanding. And then this is everything we did in 2025. Scrolling down, because we're going to talk about 2026. We're proposing to cancel our January 2026 meeting. Reasons are that we don't have any agenda items right now for that meeting. And we will be coming back in February. Corey's going to do an overview of Bike Index. And if there's anything that we hear from you tonight that you're interested, we could add it to that agenda. In March, we'll bring Russell and Arlington 30% design to you, the 5th Street IJK update. And then in April, our meeting is the same day as the General Plan Commission Palooza, which you are all invited to attend and participate in. And so you would only have one meeting that month instead of two, which is, I think, a nice win. And then in May, I hope to bring to you the short range transit plan final plan, and then some street design standards to review. So that is as far as we've gotten into 2026.
Great, thank you. Is there any public comment on the task calendar? Okay, if there's no public comment. Are there any commissioner comments on the task calendar? Yes, Eric.
Yes, please. Is this a time when we can ask for additional information, or for additional items to potentially add to the calendar in the future?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Great. I would really like a discussion on the current transportation projects in the city that I can just think of a few off the top of my head that I just want to kind of status updates on, like the one for the pedestrian underpass near the Amtrak station to get to Olive, for example. The grant for the cool pavement, I'd love to know where we are on that. I mean, I think there's a number of projects and several that I'm sure I'm not aware of, but those two just come to mind. Could we get an item, like can we have a meeting on transportation projects, funded and partially funded, where we're at, what we still need, potential completion dates, those types of things, just because I get asked when I tell people that I'm on the transportation commission about projects that neighbors have heard about, and they're like, where are we on that? And I don't know, and I feel like I should. have at least some idea. So I don't know if we can get an item or agenda for that at some point.
Yes, we can. If we got some time, we'll put together a memo with a lot of that information on the top 5 or 10 of them and get that out to you as well, so you've got something.
We also have a city website. If you go to cityofdavis.org/bikes, you can go into, there's a transportation improvement map, and you can look at all of the projects that our engineers keep up to date on that map, which will give you some insight into existing projects and proposed projects too.
Thank you, Jennifer. I'm aware of that website, but I can't ask the website questions. And so I'd like to have an agenda item where I can ask staff questions about that. Thank you.
Great. Any other feedback from commissioners on the task calendar? Okay, with that, then I'll ask if there is a motion to adjourn the meeting. So, is there a second?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Motion carries. Thank you all very much for your participation this evening, and we'll see you in a couple months.